Welcome to a new arc, the Recurrence, where the past is just a preview, only on your dose of Wowness.
In a lab, decades after the burial, scientists drilled into the tooth of a skeleton pulled from a mass grave in London, a grave dug in a hurry, sometime in the 1300s, for victims of a disease that killed roughly a third of Europe. Inside that tooth, they found DNA, and the DNA told them something that connected that grave to two other catastrophes, separated from it by centuries in either direction. The pathogen in that tooth was Yersinia pestis. This single bacterium was responsible for the Justinianic Plague of 541 CE, the 14th century Black Death, and the third pandemic that spread across 6 continents in the 1890s. The same organism drove each of these global events, surviving for 1,400 years by receding into the background between human outbreaks. This marks the first major shift in scale for our arc. While previous episodes traced patterns in the stars or the movement of magma, this recurrence is biological. It operates on the scale of human history. Yersinia pestis is primarily a disease of the wild. It can circulate within wild rodent colonies for generations, staying localized within an ecosystem without ever encountering a human host. The bridge to humanity is the Xenophila chiapis flea, shown here. When infected rodent populations experience a sudden die-off, these fleas lose their primary hosts and seek out alternatives, which often brings them into contact with human settlements. These pandemics are essentially a byproduct of rodent ecology. Humanity is caught in the crossfire when an established animal pathogen finds a path into our trade and living spaces. In 541 CE, the pathogen exploited a specific human network. It hitched a ride on Byzantine grain ships sailing from Egypt and funneled directly into the imperial capital of Constantinople. Because it arrived during the reign of Emperor Justinian I, depicted here, it is known to history as the Plague of Justinian. Traditional accounts of this era come from chroniclers like Procopius, who described a catastrophe so severe it killed thousands of people every day. For much of the 20th century, historians accepted these reports at face value, estimating total deaths in the tens of millions. Recent revisionist scholarship challenges those figures. Critics point out that the archaeological record lacks the mass graves described in the texts, and note that ancient writers often used rhetorical exaggeration to emphasize the severity of a crisis. Scholarship remains divided on the exact mortality figures. Without more physical evidence, the true death toll of the first pandemic remains a matter of active debate. Regardless of the final numbers, the 6th century outbreak revealed a vulnerability. An invisible biological agent had successfully exploited an empire's primary food supply line to trigger a profound societal shock. 8 centuries later, the pattern repeated. In the 1340s, the bacterium spilled over from rodent populations on the Central Asian steppes and entered the busiest human networks of the medieval world. This second wave, the Black Death, moved via Silk Road caravans to the Black Sea. From there, Mediterranean shipping routes carried it aggressively into every corner of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Unlike the Justinian Plague, the evidence for the Black Death is overwhelming. We have a convergence of independent data points, from parish burial records and tax rolls, to the physical remains found in documented plague pits across the continent. The resulting population collapse was so extreme it triggered a labor shortage. Surviving peasants saw their wages rise, a shift that eventually helped to destabilize the rigid feudal labor structures that had dominated European life for centuries. These extensive records map how the bacterium weaponizes expanding global trade to reach maximum impact. For centuries, we only suspected these pandemics were related. In 2011, a study led by Kirsten Boss provided the first molecular confirmation. Researchers isolated a draft genome of Yersinia pestis from the dental pulp of 14th century London victims. By comparing DNA samples, researchers built a phylogenetic tree showing the 14th century Black Death and 6th century Justinianic remains belong to the same ancestral lineage. This proves the exact same bacterium struck humanity 800 years apart, not just diseases with similar symptoms. If a single microscopic organism quietly reshaping 14th centuries of human history sounds like your kind of Wednesday, hit subscribe. The recurrence still has 7 more patterns after this one. DNA sequencing has elevated this story from a historical theory to a genetically documented recurrence. The third pandemic began in China in the mid-1800s, writing a new human network. Steamships, like the ones in this harbor, carried infected rats and fleas to port cities on 6 different continents. This wave was particularly devastating in India, where millions died. However, this pandemic also coincided with the rise of modern science. In 1894, bacteriologists finally isolated and identified the bacterium itself. While the World Health Organization eventually declared the third pandemic over, the bacterium was never eradicated. It simply receded into its natural reservoir. Yersinia pestis continues to circulate in wild rodents, including the prairie dog seen here in the American West. WHO and CDC data confirm that the plague still causes human cases every year. Active monitoring continues in regions like Madagascar, shown here, where healthcare workers manage localized outbreaks before they can spread. The organism that reshaped the 6th and 14th centuries is still with us. The primary difference between a modern case cluster and a historical catastrophe is the firewall provided by antibiotics and modern public health infrastructure. Tomorrow, on day 134, we zoom out from one pathogen to compare the systemic collapses of the Bronze Age and Western Rome. Rome's shadow asks how similar their warning signs actually were. I'll see you then.